Speaking to the BBC, Ukraine's President Zelensky urges Russians to make a stand against the war.
All that Putin is afraid of, it's not even a nuclear strike. He's afraid of his own society. He's afraid of his own people.
The Nobel Peace Prize is jointly awarded to 2 Ukrainian and Russian civil liberties groups and an activist imprisoned in Belarus. Well, in Moscow, President Putin has been celebrating his 70th birthday. The head of Russia's Orthodox Church told the nation Mr. Putin's rule was mandated by God, praising him for transforming Russia's image and defending its national interests. But on Russian television, there's now open criticism of the Ukraine war, and this year's Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to human rights campaigners from Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports from Moscow.
70 today, Vladimir Putin was hosting regional leaders, a little summit in a large palace. His guests, of course, had brought him gifts, including, bizarrely, a mountain of melons. Out on the streets, a highly choreographed happy birthday. Putin's my president, they spell out. But apart from a little organised adoration, no widespread celebration. Perhaps this is why. Pro-Kremlin commentators are now admitting that Russia's doing badly in Ukraine. It's not going our way, the presenter says. We must stop lying, says this MP and retired general. Certain leaders need to understand that. No present here for Putin. In Oslo, the Nobel Peace Prize went to defenders of democracy and civil society. Russian rights group Memorial, Belarus activist Alice Bilyatsky, and Ukraine's Center for Civil Liberties.
They have made an outstanding effort to document war crimes, human rights abuses, and the abuse of power.
For more than 30 years, Memorial has been cataloguing the victims of Joseph Stalin's terror and rights abuses in modern Russia. The authorities have shut it down, but it's still trying to operate.
Will the prize lead to less pressure on us from the authorities? No, it will only increase. I'm sure that in the current climate, our authorities will say, right, the 5th column, and they also got a Nobel Prize. We'll show you how we'll restore order in our country.
A prestigious peace prize for a Russian rights group will not impress Russia's president. Vladimir Putin still seems determined to secure victory in Ukraine and against the West. But at the very least, it's a show of solidarity to those inside this country who still believe it's possible to build here a civil society. Don't expect the Kremlin to help. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Liverpool. Congratulations!
Liverpool is chosen ahead of Glasgow to host next year's Eurovision Song Contest. The organisers promise the best party ever. So we now know it will be held in Liverpool, but Ukraine will be at the heart of the contest.
The frontman of Kalush Orchestra, the band that clinched the Eurovision title for Ukraine this year, had a special message for the host city.
We're very pleased that next year's Eurovision Song Contest will take place in Liverpool. Although I've never been there, performing where the Beatles themselves started will be so inspiring. I would also like to remind everyone that it's our mission to make sure that the next Eurovision Song Contest 2024 will take place in Kyiv.
So there we go, now you know, not Glasgow, going to be Liverpool. A lot of very happy people there.
Indeed.
Ukrainian officials say they found 2 mass burial sites in the recently liberated town of Lyman, one with around 200 graves.
Ukraine says 2 mass burial sites have been found in the eastern town of Lyman, which was recently liberated from Russia. The BBC hasn't yet independently verified those claims.
Also this morning, a fire has broken out on the rail bridge between the Crimea Peninsula and Russia.
The Ukrainian president, his army and their people are currently on the front foot with the momentum. But they all know there's a long, tough winter ahead. Dan Johnson, BBC News.
But this morning, this massive fire on the bridge connecting Crimea to Russia. Details are still coming in. This happened about 3 hours ago, and Russian state media saying that a fuel tank is on fire, and traffic on this bridge has been suspended. And this bridge has been used by Russia to move military equipment to Russia, to Crimea, to be used to Ukraine. So it's thought to be a target for the Ukrainian forces. Of course, Crimea is the peninsula that the Russians annexed in 2014, something that hasn't been recognized by the Ukrainians. And the government here has been saying that they are going ahead to try to retake the peninsula from the Russians.
Our correspondent Hugo Bachega is in Kyiv for us this morning. Hugo, good to see you. We've seen these images of that bridge that links Crimea and Russia. What more can you tell us about what's happened?
Good morning, Naga. So in the last hour, we had a statement from the Russian authorities saying that a lorry explosion was what the cause of this fire there. We're talking about two bridges. One is the train bridge and the second one is the road bridge. So the lorry exploded on this road bridge and a section of this bridge has collapsed. And as a result of this explosion, oil tankers caught fire. So this is what the Russians are saying. We haven't had any kind of independent confirmation of that. But this is very significant because this is the only connection between Russia and Crimea. This bridge was opened by President Putin in 2018, 4 years after Russia invaded and illegally annexed the Crimea Peninsula. And the Ukrainians have been saying that the goal of this counteroffensive is to take back all territory that's now under Russian occupation, including Crimea. So obviously the speculation would be that the Ukrainians have some kind of involvement in what happened today. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a number of explosions happening in Crimea. The Ukrainians have never acknowledged having any kind of involvement in those explosions, but I think the speculation today is that the Ukrainians could have some kind of involvement in this fire there in Crimea. And this happens during this counteroffensive. The Ukrainians have the momentum, so it would mark another humiliating setback for President Putin.